Here's an experiment for you. Take passionate experts in human resource technology. Invite cross-industry experts from inside and outside HR. Mix in what's happening in people analytics today. Give them the technology to connect. Hit record. Pour their discussions into a beaker. Mix thoroughly. And voila, you get the HR Data Labs podcast, where we explore the impact of data and analytics to your business. We may get passionate and even irreverent, but count on each episode challenging and enhancing your understanding of the way people data can be used to solve real-world problems. Now, here's your host, David Turetsky.
Hello and welcome to the HR Data Labs podcast. I'm your host, David Turetsky, alongside my friend, trusty co-host, and colleague from Salary.com, Dwight Brown. Dwight, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing, David?
I'm good. Hey, Dwight, I heard a rumor that you got something brand new that we saw for the first time today.
It was like Christmas today or last night when I picked it up. I am the new owner of a pair of the Apple Vision Pro VR goggles, or I think they're calling them AR goggles at this point.
Hashtag jealous.
Yeah.
They are crazy cool. And our guest for today, Becky Evan, had actually seen them. We actually had given Dwight had given a demonstration of them. Becky, what did you think about Dwight's new Christmas present?
Oh, I thought it was really cool. Thank you for sharing it with us. It was also awesome just to see how lifelike the avatar was when you popped into the meeting. So I'm excited to see where this technology takes us.
Blew us away, Dwight.
Yeah.
Totally.
It is. There's so much potential with this and a lot of fun. Takes you to a totally different world. But it was fun being able to try them on Teams. And
yeah.
Like you said, the avatar and a lot of craziness.
So we're going to put a picture of that in the show notes so you can see how actual crazy cool this thing is. And you're going to be like, well, isn't that just a picture of Dwight from 10 years ago? No, that's Dwight today.
See, that's what I love most about it, is that it made me younger.
Dude, your spirit is already younger. But we're not talking about that today. We're going to be talking with Becky. So, Becky, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to today.
Yeah, I thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited to be here. Today, I'm an associate professor at Metro State University, which is based in Minnesota. It's part of the Minnesota State four-year university system, and I teach in the College of Business and Management there. Cool. Prior to academia, I was a training and operations executive in Fortune 500 companies. I led things from compliance training to supply training, finance training. So lots of different backgrounds in various HR areas. In this role in higher ed, which has been a shift for me. So I'm entering my fifth year and still feeling like I'm figuring out what is higher ed since I was in corporate for so long. But my focus is really on researching and also teaching DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion within organizations. And so that led us here to some of the research that a team that I'm on published last year.
And when we get to the topic, I think everybody's going to be quite interested because it's going to be a different take, one that we've never had on this program. So we're very, very excited to talk about it. But first, we always do this. We have to ask, Becky, what's one fun thing that no one knows about you?
Yeah, so I actually really thought about this and tried to pick something that I've never shared before. So to be fair, my family knows this about me, but I am a bad driver.
Really?
I am a horrible driver. And I don't know if it's because I grew up in California, and so I never really learned to be graceful on the road, or learned to go over 20 miles per hour, maybe, because I was always stuck in traffic. But now that I'm in the Midwest, I'm like, oh, wow, I'm really bad at this. And people in the Midwest, they love driving. Like, why would we fly to Chicago? That's an 8-hour drive. And I would have never said that living in California. But no, I'm just bad. So most of the time, my wife will gently say, hey, how about I drive? And I know that's her way of saying, I've had enough of your, like, follow hands, my eyes follow my hands.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's how you know she loves you, by the way.
Well, you would do fine down here in Phoenix because everybody talks about the California drivers down here in Phoenix. And I got to say, ever since moving here, I have to agree. California drivers are the worst. I don't know what happens over there in that state,
I
but
don't either. And I didn't know it until I moved somewhere. And it was probably 3 years. And my wife says, "Do you ever turn on a turn signal?" And I just didn't even realize that I wasn't using a turn signal.
Wow.
And in California, I
hanging
just
your
never-
hand out the window.
Are you sure you're not from Rhode Island?
Oh, is that a
Because
Rhode Island thing too?
They
Oh,
never use turn signals, and if they do, it's after they're passing you at 95 miles an hour, so it doesn't
it's
matter.
like an FYI. I just passed you. Yeah, it's so funny.
Yeah.
Things I just didn't notice until I lived somewhere else.
Well, it was a very brave thing for you to admit, and so we really appreciate that.
Thank you.
And the Tesla salespeople with the self-driving cars are about to call you. now.
I'm their target audience. They're like, yes, this will be safer for everyone if this is what.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So our topic for today is a fascinating one. If you follow the HR Data Labs podcast at all, you've noticed that over the last 3 seasons, at least, we've spoken about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Probably, I'm not trying to make anything up here, at least 30 or 40 times. But today we're going to take somewhat of a different take on it, and it's going to be a fascinating discussion. Today we're going to be talking about qualitative data from a study that Becky and her colleagues had done on white DE&I professionals. So our first question, Becky, is what led to your research on those people who identify as white on DE&I teams?
Hey, this is William Tincup. Listen, we did a series for iSolved called Heroes of HR, where we talk to HR practitioners. And these are just your run-of-the-mill, everyday, slogging it out, 300 employees in Cedar Rapids, HR pros. Mostly it's centered around iSolved and what they do with iSolved, but also they talk a lot about kind of the day-to-day rigor of HR. If you're curious about that, search for Heroes of HR wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And I agree. It is a unusual topic. And so I'm really happy to dig in with you and talk to listeners afterwards as well, because I am curious about how we can begin to unpack DEI and the impacts of DEI within organizations. And so this research, the research team, we started talking about this after the murder of George Floyd. And I'm in Minneapolis, and that was, it hasn't stopped. We've seen murders before, we're seeing murders after. And as researchers, we were like, what can we do? And we felt like it was important to really begin digging in and trying to understand how all of these organizations, and again, we saw them in Minneapolis, that were coming forward and committing millions of dollars. Think of the Targets, the Best Buys, the 3Ms. These are all in Minnesota.
Right.
And trying to understand, what really is going to change the culture within organizations. And as a white researcher, I really felt like I needed to think ethically about what is my role in this research. And is my role to talk to marginalized, underserved racial minorities and understand their lived experience. And I just didn't feel like that was my role. I feel like there are researchers that have been doing that work for years and years. And I wasn't sure if us knowing that information would actually make the change that we want to see. As I was doing research, it was really around looking at who holds the power within organizations, who holds up status quo, what does this look like? And I felt like there was a desire and a need to really want to understand the role of dominant culture. So those who identify as white, those that are in positions that can, in fact, make changes for individuals, whether that's to policies, procedures, informal rules within an organization. And so after about a year of going through the literature, we landed on, why don't we talk to those who are white in DEI teams? So which is a majority, at least it was when we did research. I know there's been a lot of changes with DEI teams. A majority of DEI leaders identify as white. A majority of people on DEI teams also identify as white. And so, one, we had a question about that in general.
Right.
Is that the most effective way? And how did folks begin to join DEI teams? What's their training been like? What has been their role navigating multiple different in-group, out-of-group experience, social identities? And so that's really kind of where we started with the research and the research that we did. And so over the course of 18 months, we interviewed 16 people throughout the United States, many in Fortune 500 companies, and asked them, okay, tell us about your experience. How did you get on a DEI team? What do you see as your role? How does being white help or hinder your experience in breaking down the structures that are not beneficial for all employees? And it was a pretty enlightening experience.
Becky, can I ask a question on that? So obviously when we talk about DEI and B, we're talking about a few different things. Not only are we talking about race, we're talking also about ethnicity, gender identity. We're talking about disability or other statuses. Mm-hmm. When you did this, you were specifically focusing on, I'll say, non-Latino, non-Latinx populations who identified as white, correct? There weren't, and I guess the other part of that question is, as I'm trying to peel back, you weren't filtering on other things like mental disability, gender diversity, or other things. It was just strictly race and ethnicity that you were focusing on.
That's correct. And okay. I think that we allowed participants that opted in to identify themselves. And I think that even that presented a really interesting conversation because so even though we all were sitting at the table saying, okay, we identify as white, we did unpack that a little bit on a DEI team and really did everything we could to find a diversity within that, meaning we did have gender diversity. So we realized we were interviewing a majority women, and so we intentionally reached out to ensure that we had gender balance between men and women. We also looked at age. We found initially we were interviewing lots of individuals under 35. And so how can we do this all over the United States? So those in the South, on the West Coast. The South was actually one of the harder areas to find participants, but we did. And then one thing that was interesting is that as we were going through this interview and hearing how people got connected to DEI, people started to reveal, I identify as LGBT. I identify as Jewish. I identify as a vet, down the list, right, of these initiatives. And so I think we had a pretty robust conversation with the participants around, okay, so how do you bring that to a DEI team, and how does or doesn't that impact anti-racism initiatives? How has that helped? So if you identify as a marginalized individual, how has that helped you in your work or not? So we had a lot of those discussions as well, because I think whiteness, that's one of the hardest things about whiteness is defining it.
Oh, absolutely. It's really a rainbow. There's, people don't realize their past. They don't realize their ancestry. They identify as something, but they may not even know that that's actually not even true unless they did much more research. So, but I think where you're trying to get to is culturally.
Yes, culturally. And so in our paper, we talked about both, right? So I think there's this idea of, if I can link my ancestry to Europe, then I'm white. So we found that in the research. But then to your point, there was this cultural element. And I think as we're seeing individuals who are immigrating into the United States, moving from countries identifying as white, it's really quite like we're questioning, like, okay, what is this whiteness now? I say that as a white person, because when I talk to my colleagues of color, they feel very crisp on what whiteness is. And so, I do want to really give that caveat that this was talking about whiteness with individuals who are white, who are defining what whiteness is, and the ones who are responsible for moving this definition around. And so that was also another part of our conversation.
Like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss a show by clicking subscribe. This podcast is made possible by Salary.com. Now, back to the show.
Which probably gets very emotional or heated in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what you are trying to do is look at it ethically, look at it more discreetly, and look at it objectively, and be able to try and put parameters around it, because what you were trying to do is study something, not try and introduce. Maybe I'm reaching here. So I'm actually have a question at the end.
Yes.
You weren't trying to reach conclusions that were necessarily trying to be provocative.
Yeah.
You were trying to reach an understanding, correct?
Yeah, I agreed. And this is just a little bit about, me and my lens. One thing that I have found very frustrating about some DEI initiatives is results will be something like, women need to be more assertive, or women need to negotiate more, or people of color need to make more eye contact, or something like that. And that really places the blame on those individuals, that there's something that I'm doing wrong in the environment.
Right.
And so I think with this research, it was really around looking at the environment through the lens of people that have power in the environment, but are also actively working to change the environment. Because like all groups, whiteness is not a monolith. And I think with all groups, we treat them as a monolith, to be fair. And I think that trying to understand dominant culture, trying to understand what it is and how it operates, will then allow us to begin to break it down, to begin to say, this isn't working, or how this person or how this group is doing it within this organization is working. Let's continue to do that. Because I think DEI is so nuanced. I can give you 10 tips of things to do in an organization, but your culture in your organization, the experience of your leaders, completely changes if that will work or not. And that has been one of the hardest things about this. And so doing this qualitative research was really trying to get us down to, how do we get into the nuances? How do we get into the minutia, the things maybe we don't talk about?
I guess the question comes to my head when you look at this from a white perspective, but you also take in all those other dimensions. Did you have a challenge in terms of the way that I view myself versus the way that people look at me from the outside and the conclusions that come with that? Because, the way that I would view myself, like you say, some people don't dig into their ancestry. I actually have Native American ancestry way down the line, not much, but I could view myself from that lens. But if you lined me up next to several individuals, they would look and they'd say, he's white. And so did you see different conclusions and experiences from looking in versus looking out, I guess, is what my question is.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that was one really tricky element of this, is how do we center whiteness in order to get to decentering whiteness? Because I think we had to talk about this. What is this whiteness? What is your identity? What are these experiences that led you to this? Now, the one thing that is unique is that everybody that we talked to was connected to a DEI team. And so this group talked a lot about their in-group identity of being white, but that they all had some sort of out-group identity. Even there was a 55-year-old white heterosexual male in our group who does DEI. He had out-group identities. And so we talked a lot about that and how that gets navigated when we're talking about race or DEI in general. So I think it's something worth talking about. I also think that and this is just for myself and my experience and those that I interviewed, it can be really uncomfortable because I'm talking to people who really want to break down some systems to make it more equitable for others. And they identify as white, so they see their power in the system. And that can be really hard to talk about. I think that there is this acknowledgement, even of myself, like, I know that I have biases. I know that I was raised to make decisions that I'm not necessarily proud of on paper. And how do I work through that and keep trying to do what I believe is the right thing or the next best thing within organizations for everybody? And I think and to talk about that in a lens of whiteness with the hope of understanding this to begin to break it down so we can decenter the dominant experience in workplaces and begin to create equality.
Hey, are you listening to this and thinking to yourself, man, I wish I could talk to David about this? Well, you're in luck. We have a special offer for listeners of the HR Data Labs podcast, a free half-hour call with me about any of the topics we cover on the podcast or whatever is on your mind. Go to salary.com/HRDL consulting to schedule your free 30-minute call today. So Becky, our third question, let me throw something out at you. So how do we measure this? Where are the analytics with this? So you've created some really cool research. We can learn more about ourselves from understanding it. How do we measure this?
Yeah, I mean, that's the $1 million question. I think that's the question that a lot of folks in DEI are really interested in understanding. And there's some really great researchers out there that are looking at these inclusion measurements. And so for this research, which is a little different, is qualitative. And I think a lot of our HR data is quantitative. We're looking at turnover rates, we're looking at retention rates, we're looking at recruitment rates. Employee engagement in many ways is also a survey, some sort of annual cultural survey or engagement survey that we ask. And so as I was thinking about this and I was thinking about like, what could people do? Qualitative in itself could be one of the measurements. And the other question that I challenge us to think through is, how are we using the data from those that identify as members in dominant culture? And so many times when we're looking at recruitment data, employee engagement data, dominant culture becomes the comparison point. So we're looking to see, okay, are women more engaged than men? Are those who identify as white more engaged than those who don't identify as white? Or pick a group. But then my question becomes that group that identifies as white holds a lot of power. In many cases, most senior leaders in organizations are in that group. And so what is it that we want to know about them and about the impact that they're having on engagement? And so I encourage, it's a heavy lift, but I encourage qualitative analysis to go alongside any of those supports. Now, we have some of those in place. Exit interviews. Take those for what they're worth. We get a lot of interesting information, but I'm also on my way out the door and maybe angry, and I'm not getting any helpful, constructive information.
Right.
But what would this look like if I, as somebody who's on DEI or somebody in HR, sitting down with the senior leader and actually saying, like, how do you really feel about this? How do you really feel about employee engagement? How do you really feel about our hiring processes? Do you feel like they're equitable? And what does equitable mean to you? It was really fascinating to ask people their thoughts and their experiences with senior leaders. And I think it's listening for things like, if I'm talking to a senior leader and they say something along the lines of, hey, I'll hire anybody. I just care about the best candidate. And on the surface, that sounds really good, but it actually needs to be dug in. We need that. There's a lot of coded messaging in that we need to unpack and understand what that means in our organization. These are very hard conversations, and a lot of us don't want to have these in the workplace, but they can help us at least get to what is really happening in our organization with our leadership team.
Don't you think that there is I would like to say a social difference in those answers after the SCOTUS opinion on affirmative action?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing that all over the place. I was just reading about Alabama, some of the legislation going through Alabama this morning. And I think that, and I think that some of those, and I encourage folks to go back and listen to some of the speakers that you've had on, who I think have done a nice job of talking through how do you bridge these conversations, because I feel like the backlash or the current discourse in some areas is that talking about DEI is somehow divisive, and that it's somehow pick wherever you're falling on the issue, that somehow someone is getting left behind because of these policies, whether we're talking about historically underrepresented communities or white communities. Somebody's getting left behind. Somebody's getting unfairly treated. And so I think that this work will continue, and that many companies see this work as incredibly important. And so I think it's important to understand, do our senior leaders see this as divisive? Do they? I don't know. But we have to understand that, or where their fears are. There was a lot of discussion around fears and cancel culture in our research about leaders who, even though they have empathy and understanding and want to launch an initiative, they feel like if they put out a wrong post somewhere, that they'll lose their entire career. And so talking to senior leaders really helps us begin to understand what are these unspoken barriers that our programs could run up against that nobody's really talking about. And all of a sudden things just die and we don't know why. And so qualitative can help us begin to unpack that.
My hope is that your research sheds a lens on the things that we're doing well and the things that we're not. Mm-hmm. And that gives us an ability to be more aware and get training on them. As a senior leader in an organization, as a CHRO in an organization, I worry every time I put an email out or text or Teams message because I need to, because everything I say and do will be put under a lens.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And so I am on a journey to be not only an ally, but also to learn every day. I make mistakes every day. I say the wrong things every day, and I'm not okay with that. And so I need to learn, and I challenge people who I work with to tell me in an unemotional way as much as possible what I do wrong. Yes, I'm a white male. Yes, I'm over 45. I'm way over 45. And I was brought up in a different time. Like to your point before, the thing I need to do and I need to focus on is be a learner and ensure that I am sitting or standing where those people are, so that, and when I say those people, I mean everybody who's not me, so that I know that the things I do and the things I say impact them in a different way that I perceive them, and be open to it. That's my hope, is that your research enables people like me to learn more so I can focus and be better. Mm-hmm. And that's what I hope those conversations with senior leaders could be. So people who are listening today, you know, and I think you brought this up before, Becky, go listen to perspectives from other people. Go read perspectives, and whether it's from Martine or Jennifer or Jackie or Becky or other people who have put out lots of thought leadership on this, think about how the things and the things you say and the things you do are perceived. Now look at what your leaders are going through and try and help them understand that. And I think, Becky, if there's one message, you know, that hopefully you're, and I guess the question is, is there a way for us to consume your research so that we can get some of those perspectives?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now it is paid. However, if you're going to use it for your personal use, please email me or contact me, whatever that looks like, and I'm happy to share, and I can send you the full article so you can review it. Because David, to your point, there are a lot of things that are working.
Right.
And there are areas that even the participants who cared quite passionately about this really saw were not working. And so I think it at least gives us a space to begin to just another pillar in all the work that has been done by communities of colors for decades to begin to understand, okay, what is this whiteness? How can we break it down for the benefit of everybody? Yeah, because I do think it's a learning journey, and our participants talked about that extensively. What does this look like to educate myself? What does this look like to educate other people who look like me or might have similar experiences to me? That was a huge part of it. And the other thing that I put and that I always share with folks, and so maybe always my shameless plug, if you don't know where to start with a professional. Start with talking to somebody who's paid to help you unpack things, because it can be really hard to jump into topics of like, tell me about the last time you had a racist experience. Tell me about the last time you were a racist. Those are heavy questions. And being vulnerable is a skill, and it takes time. And so if you're like, I don't know where to begin, connect with me. Happy to share my paper. I also encourage you just to practice being vulnerable in a space where it's low risk, where it's with somebody who's paid to listen to you and help you process. And also beginning to see some of the pain from some of this work, knowing that, understanding that I have hurt people, that's a heavy thing to carry. And as somebody who loves other people, like, that is one of the worst things for me to do, is to hurt other people. And so I think me working through some of that pain allows me to show up in this space and decenter myself, because I've been working through some of my pain. I'm not working through this in a public space with my colleagues of color. And so I think that there's lots of different ways to begin, or to step in, or to learn, to educate ourselves, to educate others. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up, David.
Yeah, hopefully it inspires a spirit of curiosity as opposed to a spirit of judgment, whether that be self-judgment or judgment of others. It's the more we're curious, the more that we're willing to learn both about ourselves as well as others. And it sounds like what you're doing is really starting that conversation and giving that safe space. And
I hope so.
And the vulnerability piece that you talked about is so key to be able to have that spirit.
It is. I like to believe that we all got into HR because people are cool. I mean, I think people are super cool. I think their stories are interesting. I think why people make decisions, I find them fascinating. And so I think it's reminding myself of that. Like, oh yeah, that's why I wanted to get in this industry. That's why, because I have this genuine love for people, and I genuinely want them to be successful. And I can get quite jaded when I start looking at reports or hearing why things are going wrong. And it's easy for me to swing like, oh my gosh, people are horrible. But it reminds me, like, no, people up close are all really cool.
Well, we hear about the bad things. We hear about people who are marching in the streets saying hateful things. We don't hear about all the wonderful things, like someone volunteering on President's Day in a food kitchen, or Martin Luther King Day, helping the homeless, or, people who put themselves out there to do the right thing for the right reasons. You don't hear about that because that's not news, but you hear a lot about the wrong. And, I guess your encouragement of doing the right thing is the right thing for you, and making sure that you're good with it. Yeah. So yeah, I love the message. It's wonderful, Becky. Thank you so much. We learned so much today. This was really cool.
Thank you. Yeah, please connect if you have questions. I love talking about this stuff, even though it's hard work. I think we have a lot of things we can do that will really benefit people and our organizations.
So we'll put your information in the show notes so people can contact you.
Please.
And maybe get access to your paper. And thank you. Dwight, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us, Becky.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you all for listening. Take care and stay safe.
That was the HR Data Labs podcast. If you liked the episode, please subscribe. And if you know anyone that might like to hear it, please send it their way. Thank you for joining us this week, and stay tuned for our next episode. Stay safe.